Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a wheelchair ramp, or maybe an elevator in a public transit station, or even a sign language interpreter at a big event, and wondered how exactly did those accommodations become standard? Well, it's absolutely crucial to remember that the rights and protections we see today, they didn't just happen automatically. No way. They were forged through intense advocacy, activism, and sweeping policy reform. So today, we're going to explore the history of disability legislation in the U.S. and really unpack how these hard-fought laws fundamentally shaped rehabilitation counseling, accessibility, and disability rights as we know them today.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the foundations of disability law, move into the civil rights shift, talk about the ADA and accessibility, look at accommodations in practice, and finally wrap up with the role of advocacy.
All right, Part 1, Foundations of Disability Law, Early Economic and Vocational Interventions. So this first era is fascinating, mostly because the earliest laws weren't actually about civil rights at all. They were really about economics. We're going to be looking at 4 massive milestones on this timeline: 1920, 1935, 1973, and 1990. Each one of these was a huge leap forward in how society supports individuals with disabilities.
Let's start right at the beginning. The Smith-Fess Act of 1920. This established the very first national vocational rehabilitation program in the U.S. It was a real game changer, driven largely by injured veterans returning from World War I. You see, before this, disability was pretty much viewed strictly through this lens of charity or medical care. But this act, it officially connected disability to employment and economic opportunity. It literally laid the foundation for the modern vocational rehab system we still use today.
Moving on to 1935, we hit the Social Security Act. This expanded those initial services into some truly monumental federal programs: Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, and Supplemental Security Income, SSI. Now, these provide vital financial support. But just as importantly, this 1935 Act broadened the scope of who actually received services, formally including folks with intellectual and developmental conditions. For counselors today, understanding these systems is vital because clients still heavily rely on them to survive and often carry deep anxieties about their benefits.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Civil Rights Shift, moving toward empowerment and equality.
Okay, so this era marks a massive philosophical shift. We're talking going from basic economic assistance to actual civil rights. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 completely transformed things. Under this law, for the very first time, clients were actually involved in planning their own rehabilitation goals. Instead of professionals making all the decisions entirely on behalf of individuals with disabilities, the clients themselves finally had a seat at the table. It was a revolutionary push toward genuine consumer empowerment.
And this brilliantly illustrates that shift. Sections 503 and 504 of that 1973 legislation. Now, Section 503 required federal contractors to take affirmative action in hiring. But Section 504? That was truly groundbreaking. It prohibits discrimination in any program receiving federal funding. Why is that such a big deal? Because it officially recognized disability discrimination as a civil rights issue. It was a massive leap toward equal opportunity in schools, workplaces, and healthcare.
Moving to Section 3, the ADA and accessibility, broadening civil rights in public life.
Building on the momentum of the 70s, we get the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And wow, this fundamentally reshaped American life. It prohibits discrimination across the board: employment, education, transportation, public accommodations, government services, basically the whole shebang. It mandated that society itself had to adapt to ensure folks with disabilities have equal access to everyday life.
A real cornerstone of the ADA is this concept of a reasonable accommodation. It's basically a modification that helps someone perform essential job functions or access opportunities equally. Organizations absolutely must provide these, unless, and this is the key exception, unless doing so creates an undue hardship for them. But generally speaking, the baseline expectation is that environments must adapt to be inclusive.
To bring that to life, let's look at a few common examples. A reasonable accommodation isn't always some massive construction project. Actually, scratch that, it rarely is. It can be flexible scheduling or remote work options. It might mean modifying a workspace, providing assistive technology, or bringing in sign language interpreters. In schools, it often looks like extended testing time. These are the practical, everyday tools of equality.
But let me pause here for a second, because this is vital to remember. True accessibility extends way beyond physical access. Ramps and accessible entrances are great, but we have to think bigger. The ADA really strengthened the idea that accessibility includes communication access, digital spaces like websites, and crucial things like mental health support.
That leads us right into Section 4, Accommodations in Practice, applying concepts to specific conditions.
So let's shift from history to practice. I want you to take a brief moment and just mentally brainstorm. Think about these 4 conditions: anxiety, ADHD, chronic illness, and mobility impairments. If you are working with someone experiencing these, what specific accommodations might you recommend for them in an educational or workplace setting?
Let's look at some options. For anxiety, reduced distraction spaces can be total game changers. For ADHD, maybe it's written instructions or structured scheduling. For chronic illness, an individual might need flexibility for medical appointments to help with fatigue management. And for mobility impairments, adaptive workstations are key. So the crucial point is this: the goal here isn't to give anyone an unfair advantage. It's about leveling the playing field and creating equitable access.
Finally, Section 5, the role of advocacy, pushing beyond legal compliance. We have to acknowledge a hard truth here. Laws alone simply do not eliminate stigma. Despite all this incredible legislation, people with disabilities still face immense barriers in society. And that's exactly where professionals step in. Advocacy involves supporting client empowerment, fiercely promoting accessibility, and challenging ableism head-on. It's about educating employers and navigating those tricky accommodation processes. Advocacy isn't just some side hustle to counseling. It is an integrated, absolute ethical requirement.
I want to read this quote directly from our source material because it perfectly captures the mindset shift we all need to have. Individuals with disabilities are not simply recipients of services. They are individuals with rights, autonomy, strengths, and valuable lived experiences. Viewing your work through that lens completely changes the dynamic, from charity to true empowerment.
Understanding this history from the Smith-Fess Act all the way to the ADA helps us recognize our ethical responsibility. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. Will you settle for simple legal compliance, just ensuring the bare minimum is met, or will you actively advocate to dismantle ableism and champion true, holistic accessibility in your practice? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on disability history, legislation, and rehabilitation counseling. Keep pushing for equity, and I'll see you next time.